The Mafia's Good Girl, Chapter 20. Violet's point of view. "Mom," Violet said as she stepped into the apartment. "I'm home." She didn't have to wait too long before her mom came running out. Barbara looked so excited to see her daughter. She came with both her hands up in the air, and she pulled Violet into a big hug. "Baby, you're back." She squealed and rocked Violet's body back and forth. Violet couldn't help but laugh. "I've missed you so much." "Me too," Violet replied, and buried her face into her mom's chest. She had been waiting for so long to see her mom again. Her heart felt so full, and she pulled away to get a better look at her mom. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm good, sweetie. Dylan's staying around the house a lot more often now while you're out on your trip. I wish he'd leave me alone, to be honest." "I'm fine," her mom laughed and waved her hand carelessly in the air. "My trip?" Violet asked. "Dylan said you went on a graduation trip with some of your friends from school. You guys went to Vermont?" Violet's mouth formed an "oh." Dylan must have told their mom that she was out on holiday. Of course, he wouldn't tell her that her precious daughter was out selling her virginity to some mafia kingpin. "Right, my trip." Violet laughed nervously. "Yeah, you know how much I wanted to go to the Ben & Jerry's factory tour. Was it fun? Did you guys have a great time?" Barbara asked. "Yeah, it was fun." Violet forced out a smile. "Selling my virginity and getting played by Damon for days was not exactly fun, but what else was I supposed to say?" "Oh, you must be so tired. Are you hungry? Do you want me to make you some food?" Barbara said as she stroked Violet's cheek. "Sure, but later. I really need to take a shower right now," Violet said as she peeled herself away. She came straight here as soon as Damon let her go. She was so desperate to get back home, she didn't even stop to take a shower at the estate. "Okay then," her mom replied. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." Violet nodded her head and turned to her heels. But before she could go into her room, she stopped and turned around, saying, "I love you, Mom." Barbara was caught off guard, but she smiled brightly at what her daughter said. "I love you too, sweetheart," she said. Violet took a moment to watch her mom, who was cleaning the kitchen counter. Being away from her for all this time was hard. Having to sell her body to a strange man was extremely difficult. But when Violet saw her mom and all the things she could do for her family with the money that she had now, it was all well worth it in the end. The moment the hot water touched Violet's skin, she let out a long sigh of relief. Her entire body was sore and her muscles were aching. This hot shower was a much-needed comfort. Violet lathered up some soap and rubbed her skin. There were marks and bruises all over, reminding her of what transpired just last night. She remembered everything on how Damon took her virginity. Violet quickly shook her head to get the image off her head. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could see were flashes from last night. She told her brain to think of anything else other than that, as she haphazardly rubbed her skin and rinsed her body. Just think about food, or coffee, or puppies. Anything but him. Violet finished her hot shower and stepped out of the shower box. She stood in front of the mirror and wiped the steam fogging the glass with her hand. She saw her reflection in the mirror, and there was a clear hickey mark on her neck. Violet rubbed the mark with her hand, but it was useless. She would need some thick foundation to hide it for the next few days. Violet let out a sigh and proceeded to dry her hair. She kept looking at her face as she blow-dried her hair, and she tried to see if there was anything else that looked different about her. Nope, I still look exactly the same. No difference whatsoever. Violet thought that losing her virginity would be a big life-altering thing. She thought she'd be like Peter Parker after a spider bit him. Suddenly, something inside her body would change, and she would be transformed into a whole new person. But no. She was still the same plain Violet as she was before, except with hickeys and very sore thighs. It's done. It's all over now. Let's just forget about it and move on. Violet put down the hairdryer and combed her hair. She thought she'd feel more emotional after everything that happened, but she felt nothing. She was neither sad nor upset, and she wasn't happy or overjoyed either. Everything just felt normal. After putting on some baggy t-shirt and her sweatpants, Violet stepped out of the bathroom and headed to her room. All she wanted to do now was jump straight to her bed to get some sleep, but when she got into her room, she saw Dylan standing and waiting for her. He greeted her with a small smile. He looked her sister up and down, and he noticed the marks on her neck. "Deal? Hey." Violet quickly went into the closet and grabbed a hoodie. She slipped the hoodie over her body so it would cover more of her skin. "Mom told me you're back." Dylan paused for a beat before continuing. "Is it done now?" "It's done," Violet said reassuringly. "We're gonna be all right from now on." "Why'd he keep you around for so long, though?" "I don't know," she sighed. "But he paid a lot of money, so I guess it's fine." "He actually paid you that much money?" Violet grabbed her phone from her bedside table and opened her bank app. She showed Dylan the screen, and his jaw fell to the floor. Her balance showed that she had a little over $1 million. Dylan looked at Violet with eyes as big as saucers, and Violet only shrugged. She put her phone back on the bedside table before climbing up the bed. "I'm thinking we can use half of it to pay off Dad's debt and Mom's medical bills. And we can use the rest to pay off the mortgage and have you back at Fordham," Violet said as she rested her head on her pillow. "And you back at Harvard?" Dylan interjected. "I can't go to Harvard, Dee. No one is gonna look after Mom. With that much money, we can always hire someone." Violet thought about the idea for a moment. After paying off her dad's debts and Mom's medical bills, she'd be left with around $550,000. Paying off the mortgage would cost another $100,000, and Dylan's tuition for 4 years at Fordham would cost around $200,000 for 4 years. In total, she'd be left with $250,000. $250,000 was still a lot of money. She could do a lot with it, like pay for better medical help for her mom, maybe get a bigger place in the suburbs, travel the world, or even save it to start building her own business. She could do a lot of things with that money, but a college degree didn't seem like a priority. When Violet turned down Harvard to be closer to her mom, she had already decided that college wasn't going to be her path in the future. But still, "I can't leave Mom alone like this." Violet sighed and shook her head. "I just can't." "But she's more important to me than Harvard or anything else in the world, Dial. And I can always just go to college here if I want to. I can apply to Rutgers next spring or whenever," she shrugged. Dylan stared at his sister to study her expression for a moment. He wished for a better life for her than this, because he knew she deserved it. She was smarter than anyone else he knew. It broke his heart that she chose to stay in New Jersey and work menial jobs just so she could take care of their mom. "Don't worry about it. I'm perfectly happy just staying here," Violet said again, as if she could read his mind. Dylan let out a sigh and raked his hair with his hand. "Well, okay. In that case, I'll stay here too." "You're not staying here," Violet cut him off sternly. "You're going back to Fordham, and that's final. I can't just take your money and leave you and Mom alone." Dylan groaned and shook his head. "You're not taking it because I'm giving it to you. If you want to make us proud, Dylan, just do this. This is your dream," she told him. "But what about your dream?" he asked back. "My dream is just to be with my family," Violet shrugged. After spending all those days at Damon's estate, Violet realized that she didn't really need much to be happy. She could be living in a castle and got everything she ever needed. But if she didn't have her loved ones around her, all of that meant nothing. "Hey, what's on your mind?" Violet asked as Dylan seemed to be lost in his thoughts. "When Dad died, I promised that I'd take care of the family. But it turns out that you're the one who's taking care of us all," Dylan said, with his gaze went to the floor. He hung his head down and put his hands into his pocket. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more." Violet got up from the bed and stood in front of her brother. She put a hand on his face and lifted his eyes up to her. "You did everything for us, Dial. We couldn't have survived without you. And I didn't do much really. I just got lucky, I guess. Lucky that there was a sex-crazed mafia lord who was willing to pay $1 million for my virginity." "Did he hurt you?" Dylan asked cautiously. "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes," Violet replied. "Now stop worrying about me and let me get some sleep." "I'm tired." Violet avoided eye contact with Dylan and turned back to the bed. He was still dissatisfied with her answer, so instead of leaving the room, he stayed around. "Hey Deal, if you really want to help me, why don't you go to the bank and deal with paying off our debts?" Violet said as she slipped under the duvet. "And then get us some nice takeout for dinner later. We should celebrate." Dylan let out a sigh. Violet turned her back on him and closed her eyes, ready for some much-needed rest. "All right," Dylan muttered under his breath before turning to the door. "I'll be right back." As soon as Violet heard the door was closed, she instantly fell into a deep sleep. Violet barely got any sleep last night, and she was beyond tired. Violet never dreamed much when she sleeps, but today was an exception. She found herself walking through the forest, and though she knew this was a dream, it felt so real and so vivid. Violet kept walking through the trees until she arrived at an opening. There was an old house by a river, and it looked so homey. Violet didn't see anyone around, and she decided to get closer to the house. "Hello," she asked as she creaked the door open. "Is anyone home?" There was no answer. Violet stepped inside the house and took a look around. She saw a long staircase, and something told her to get up there. Violet climbed the stairs and found a door waiting for her. Violet reached for the doorknob and pushed the door back. Violet gasped in shock once she saw the inside of that room. It looked exactly like Damon's office at the estate. No way. This can't be. Something inside her told her to leave, but Violet stood her ground. Instead of leaving, she walked into the office and began inspecting it. She stood over Damon's desk and saw old pictures of Damon, Talia, Adrian, and Isabella scattered all around. Violet went through the stack of photographs, and on the very bottom, she found an old picture of Isabella. Violet then reached for the photograph to study it further, but suddenly the face inside the photograph changed, and it looked like it was her and not Isabella. "What?" "I knew you'd be back." Violet heard a familiar voice and turned her head around instinctively. Her eyes jolted wide as she saw Damon standing right behind her. He was wearing his signature sleek black suit and devilish smirk. "Back? What?" Before Violet could do or say anything, Damon closed the distance between their bodies. He stood with his chest flushed against her back, and she was trapped between his body and the desk. Damon's hands began trailing the curves of her body, and they rested on her hips. Violet couldn't do anything, and her legs began to squirm. "Are you a good girl, Violet?" he said, as he rubbed himself against her back, so very slowly and sensually. Only good girls get to come. Violet shivered as she could feel something hard being pressed against her lower back. Damon's hands were now slowly lifting up her nightgown, and her bare ass was exposed to the cold air. Damon continued rubbing himself against her, and he leaned down to kiss her neck. Violet closed her eyes and tipped her head back in response. "Yes, I am," she said. "Please, tell me you're my good girl." Violet didn't immediately respond. Damon proceeded to slap her ass hard. The pain was stinging her skin. "Say it," he demanded. "I'm your good girl, Damon," Violet whimpered helplessly. "I'm your good little girl." "Yes, you are." Damon stifled a laugh, and he pushed himself into her from behind. Violet let out a sharp cry as he plunged into her so deep and hard. Damon didn't stop to let her adjust to him. He gripped her body tightly in his arms, and he was pounding so deep and so hard into her, It felt like he was going to break her in half. "Now come for daddy, baby girl." And just like that, Violet came unraveling around him. She let out a loud scream as the powerful explosion washed over her body. She reached an orgasm that was bigger and more intense than anything she had ever felt before. "No!" Violet screamed aloud, and her eyes opened in shock. Her body shot up instinctively, and she saw that she was back inside her room. Violet looked around her in confusion and steadied her breathing. Her heart was racing so fast, she felt like she was getting a heart attack. "Honey, are you okay?" Violet's mom pushed the door open and peeked her head in. "I heard you screaming from the living room." "I'm okay, Mom," Violet said through ragged breaths. "I thought I saw a spider, but it's nothing." "Well, all right. I'm right outside if you need me." Barbara let out a laugh and closed the door again. Violet slapped her head with her hand and trashed her head back on the pillow. She rolled her eyes dramatically before falling back to sleep. "This is so wrong. I'm not supposed to be enjoying it, let alone wanting more of it." Violet groaned to herself before pulling the duvet above her face. She shook her head wildly from side to side, hoping it would somehow erase all the memories of Damon from her brain. "Yeah, take that, Violet. This is what you get for making a deal with the devil."